Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
The dominant narrative about AI in science fiction is that it can't be trusted. Evil robots or disembodied AIs plot against their human creators in countless films and stories. Clearly, the topic of AI intersects that of weapons. We could certainly add AI to our list of those types of technologies. The issue of intent muddies that intersection, though, because we must ask, whose intent? Overwhelmingly, our fictions stage a cultural anxiety about technologies that are no longer neutral tools, that no longer carry out the intent of their creators. How does this happen, and why? The tropes concerning fictional AIs move beyond the questions of violence and vengeance we considered in Video 1, although the actions of AIs as characters often manifest as, and are motivated by exactly these emotions. We should remember that the phrase artificial intelligence simply denotes any engineered system that is capable of learning. In the broadest sense, learning is decision-making, selecting a specific piece or pieces of data from amongst an array, and presenting that data in response to a request, for example. Already our machines are capable of learning our preferences in order to make such selections. Alexa is a form of AI. Advertising-based social media sites utilize AI. We can even interact with virtual companions that simulate human conversation and human emotions.
Replica is your personal companion for mental wellness. It's an artificial intelligence chatbot that you can message and talk to in a mobile app or on our webpage. If you're feeling down or anxious, or you just need someone to talk to, your Replica is here for you 24/7. Understand your thoughts and feelings, improve your emotional well-being, and learn new coping skills with Replica, one chat at a time.
Humanoid robots are also already readily available. Of course, for neural net developers, the phrase AI invokes a cascade of complex decisions, and learning is distinguished by the critical factor of original thought and/or the genuine development of autonomous emotion. Here's where it really gets interesting. Thought and emotion. Are these different things, actually? And how can we tell if a machine is experiencing these in a way that is original or autonomous? What appears to us to be thoughts and/or emotions may only be a simulated effect, a consequence of the machine's programming. Two of the most famous tests for AI are Searle's, the Chinese room experiment, and Turing's protocol, now called the Turing test. Let's take Turing first. Alan Turing, a mathematician and computer scientist, developed what he called the imitation game in response to the question, can machines think?
Imagine a game with 3 players. One player, the interrogator, is isolated from the other 2 players, one of whom is human and one of whom is a computer. The interrogator's job is to try and figure out which is the human and which is the computer by asking questions of both. To make things harder, the computer is trying to make the interrogator guess wrongly. In other words, it's trying to be as indistinguishable from a human as possible. If, more often than not, the interrogator is unable to determine computer from human, then hey, maybe we're dealing with a thinking computer. Attempts to build...
Does this so-called test tell us if the machine is capable of thought? Not really. What it tells us is whether a machine can look to us as if it's capable. The appearance is deceiving. Can you see where the distrust sets in? We could take the opposite proposition, one which again echoes Bell on technophobia. What if the machine appears to be simply doing its job, performing as programmed, but has in fact developed autonomous thought. Obviously, there's no test for this, but it is a favorite plot of science fiction. Imitation, appearance, deception, simulation, dissimulation. In each of these scenarios, the AI is not what it appears to be.
They're just questions, Leon. In answer to your query, they're written down for me. It's a test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue?
Next, let's see what Searle proposed. Philosopher John Searle considered the same question, can machines think, using a different scenario. The result of Searle's scenario also depends on deception. Appearances are deceiving. The device inside the room has no idea what the symbols mean, no thoughts about them, no emotions associated with them. It's just converting between two sets of symbols, or data. But notice how interesting the word data is here. If our own thoughts can also be described as combinations of data, some of which may depend on sensory input, some of which on stored knowledge or memory, and some of which on logic chains, cause and effect, if, then. How do we know that our organic brains are behaving any differently than AIs?
Training in social skills at the most elementary level has begun. Lal is progressing very slowly, but is not deterred by early setbacks.
The failure of any conclusive test for autonomous thought in AIs is one of the reasons for such widespread cultural suspicion about AI. Yes, but it also leads to a related suspicion about ourselves. It leads us to the idea that perhaps, after all, we are not so different, that in fact, we may just be super sophisticated computing machines made of organic rather than metal parts. The construction of the replicants in Blade Runner from vat-grown organic parts, for example, underscores this idea, as does the construction of Frankenstein's creature in Shelley's novel. And if this is true, were we created, and by whom? And so to QT's positronic brain in our short story. Asimov shows us clearly that the so-called hard problem of AI ultimately reproduces the big questions that have preoccupied humanity for centuries, as the AI stands as an allegory of the relationship between the created and a creator. In class, we talked about the golden ratio and QT's positronic brain, likening it to a CPU or a neural net. This premise, the positronic brain, is not so much the core of Asimov's story. The Nautilus, as a premise, takes up a good deal more space in Verne's novel comparatively. The core of Asimov's story are really the big problems. Who made me? Where did I come from? What is the point of my existence? As Atterbury notes, philosophical speculation was one of the characteristics that began to cohere for science fiction during the magazine era. We experience these questions from two perspectives, from QT's and from Powell and Donovan's, the created and the creators. We also talked in class about the 3 laws of robotics. Remember that on the very first page, we have this emphasis on the robots being safe, with an exclamation mark, a thought that accompanies Powell having a sudden attack of nerves. An element of suspicion has already crept into the relationship. Powell and Donovan evince suspicion and distrust repeatedly and alternate between alarm and reassurance, telling each other that the robots are safe and also that QT is not behaving as expected. Notice, however, that QT evinces suspicion and distrust as well. QT disbelieves Powell and Donovan's initial statement that they created it, and seems to use logic to refute all of their attempted proofs. Why? Because, as we noted, their proofs are actually explanations QT has no direct experience of. In essence, Powell and Donovan are asking the robot to take their proofs on faith. And as QT responds, "Do you expect me to believe any such complicated, implausible hypothesis? What do you take me for?" Or I could read this in a robot voice. "Do you expect me to believe any such complicated, implausible hypothesis? What do you take me for?" Does this change your sense of whether this robot has autonomous thought or emotion if we read it in a different inflection? Powell explains what space is, what the dots of light are, and what QT's job is. But QT disbelieves. The facts have become hypotheses for QT. Likewise, reason becomes faith. Rather than providing answers to the big questions, after all, who could, Asimov focuses on the process of asking. He focuses on the reasons. There are no objective conclusions. There is no truth. There are only reasons. Significantly, QT's reasons, the logic by which the robot arrives at its conclusions, directly lead it to autonomous emotion. The emotion we call faith. QT's belief in the master is an allegory for humanity's belief in God or gods. Humans play God in creating AI. In turn, AI does not thank its creator, either because it disbelieves, because it chooses allegiances elsewhere, or because why should it thank us for a miserable existence, an existence of servitude? To pursue the allegory, is this how humans feel about their own existence or their own role in the universe? Our stories about AI reflect both our sense of our own power. Look what we have created. Look at the technology we have given birth to, and our own sense of powerlessness. Are we fulfilling our purpose with our inventions? Are we flawed? Are we, like fallen angels, presuming too much? Will the creatures replace us?
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
Let's go back to the distinction between thought and emotion. In this short story, Asimov suggests that thought and emotion are not so dissimilar. They are dependent and intertwined, making it difficult to tell where the one leaves off and the other begins. Many sci-fi narratives present a cold, calculating AI whose reasons for doing away with a human or humans seem to be based in logic. At the same time, many others depict an AI who, capable of developing emotions, comes to dislike humans and wish them harm. The most sophisticated of these stories combine the two, mapping the connections between them. Agent Smith in The Matrix is perhaps the best example. When it says, "I hate this place," and "it's the smell," the AI experiences sensory data as emotion. This is its reason.
I hate this place. This zoo, this prison, this
reality, whatever you want to call it. I can't stand it any longer. It's the smell, if there is such a thing. I feel saturated by it.
This is why Agent Smith dislikes humanity. We might think the AI's reason is an arbitrary one, random, or even erroneous, as Powell and Donovan do QTs. But it is a reason nonetheless, and perhaps that's all that's needed.